The catalyst for change. In the heart of a bustling metropolis, amidst towering skyscrapers and the persistent hum of city life, lay Global Shipping Incorporated. The company's expansive warehouse was a hive of activity, filled with the sounds of machinery, the chatter of employees, and the occasional shot of camaraderie among coworkers. Among the many faces that populated this frenetic environment, one figure stood out: Troy Johnson. Troy was a broad-shouldered black man whose presence commanded attention, not just because of his physical stature, but also due to his infectious positivity. His warm smile and compassionate nature made him well-liked among his colleagues. He had been with Global Shipping for over 5 years, during which he had developed a reputation as the go-to person for everything from handling heavy packages to navigating the complexities of the company's inventory system. "Hey, Troy," called out Melissa, a petite woman struggling under the weight of a precariously stacked tower of boxes. "Can you help me out?" Without a moment's hesitation, Troy sprinted across the concrete floor, his work boots clattering against the surface. "Of course. What do you need?" he replied, a reassuring smile lighting up his face. As they worked together, Troy effortlessly lifted the boxes with the ease of someone who had dedicated years to physical labor. The camaraderie shared in those brief moments resonated through the warehouse, showcasing the strong sense of community that had developed among the employees. But Troy's kindness extended beyond his coworkers. He had a deeply rooted belief in the importance of helping others, instilled in him by his grandmother, who often said, "Always lend a hand when you see someone in need." This philosophy was his guiding principle and dictated his every action, both in and out of work. On that fateful day, Troy's life was about to take an unexpected turn. After a busy morning of sorting and packing, Troy took a break outside the warehouse. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the parking lot. It was during this brief respite that he noticed a commotion near the entrance. A disabled veteran, struggling with a heavy load of packages, caught Troy's eye. The man's frail frame contrasted sharply with the burdens he was attempting to carry. Troy's heart ached at the sight. He had seen many veterans face challenges after returning home, and this man's struggle resonated deeply within him. Without thinking twice, Troy rushed over to assist. "Hey there. Let me help you with that," Troy said, gently taking some of the boxes from the veteran's hands. The veteran, who introduced himself as Hank, looked up with gratitude. "Thank you, man. I didn't think I'd make it to the door without dropping everything. It's been a rough day." "I hear you," Troy replied, offering a reassuring nod. "But we all have rough days. Just gotta push through." As they walked together, Hank shared snippets of his story. The sacrifices he made for his country, the injuries he sustained during his service, and the challenges he faced in adjusting to civilian life. Troy listened intently, moved by Hank's resilience and spirit. "People often forget what we go through after serving," Hank lamented. "It's tough to find work, and sometimes the system doesn't seem to care." Troy felt a familiar fire igniting within him. He knew he had to do something to help. "Have you tried the veteran support programs in the area?" he asked. "I've looked into them, but they can be confusing, and honestly, I've had trouble getting through," Hank admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. Troy's mind raced with ideas. "How about I help you? We can figure it out together. I can help you fill out applications and get in touch with the right people." Hank's eyes widened, and a smile broke across his face. "You'd do that for me?" "Absolutely," Troy replied, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. "You served our country. It's the least I can do." As they reached the entrance, Troy felt a sense of pride wash over him. He hadn't just helped Hank with his packages. He was offering a lifeline to someone who had given so much for his country. The interaction left a lasting impression on both men, but little did Troy know, this simple act of kindness would soon have profound repercussions. Returning to the warehouse, Troy's spirits were high. His coworkers noticed the difference. "You seem happier today," Melissa remarked as they passed each other. Just helped out a veteran, Troy replied, the pride evident in his voice. That's amazing, she exclaimed. More people should do what you did. But not everyone shared this sentiment. As the day wound down, Troy's supervisor, Mr. Jenkins, called him into his office. The room felt small and stifling, the air thick with tension. Troy could sense something was off. "Sit down, Troy," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice grave. "Is everything okay, sir?" Troy asked, concern creeping into his voice. "We need to talk about what happened earlier," Mr. Jenkins began, leaning back in his chair. "I heard you helped a veteran outside the warehouse. While I appreciate your willingness to lend a hand, I must remind you that our company has rules about leaving your designated area during work hours." Troy's heart sank. "I was just trying to help someone in need. He was struggling, and I couldn't just stand by." "I understand that, but you jeopardized your productivity and set a bad example for the team." "We have policies in place for a reason," Mr. Jenkins replied, his tone firm. "Policies shouldn't come before compassion." Troy shot back, feeling a surge of frustration. Mr. Jenkins' expression hardened. "This isn't about compassion. It's about the company's bottom line. I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go." Stunned, Troy stood frozen in shock. "You can't be serious. I've dedicated 5 years to this company. You're firing me for helping someone." "Yes, I am," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Troy walked out of the office feeling as though the ground had been ripped from beneath his feet. He had given his all to global shipping, and now he found himself unemployed for a simple act of kindness. As he stepped back into the warehouse, the energy shifted. His colleagues, sensing the change, looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern. "What happened?" Melissa asked, her eyes wide. "I was fired," Troy said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Fired? Why?" "I helped a veteran outside," Troy replied, bitterness creeping into his voice. Apparently, it was against company policy. The murmurs of disbelief rippled through the warehouse, and a sense of solidarity began to form among Troy's coworkers. They gathered around him, expressions of sympathy and anger etched across their faces. "This isn't right, Troy," Melissa said, shaking her head. "You did the right thing." Troy felt a mixture of anger and sadness. "I thought I could make a difference. I just wanted to help." As he stepped outside the warehouse, the weight of his dismissal settled heavily on his shoulders. It was a moment that would change the course of his life forever. But little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would not only transform his life, but ignite a movement that would challenge the very core of what global shipping stood for. As Troy walked away from the warehouse, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city. The streets were alive with the energy of a Friday evening, but all he could feel was a sense of loss and betrayal. He pulled out his phone, contemplating what to do next. Then he remembered Hank. He had promised to help him navigate the veteran support programs. With a deep breath, he dialed Hank's number. After a few rings, Hank answered, his voice cheerful despite the circumstances. "Troy, it's great to hear from you. Did you make it home okay?" Hank asked. "I'm all right, but I have some news," Troy began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I got fired today." There was a pause on the other end. "Fired? What happened?" Troy recounted the events of the day, the help he offered, the supervisor's reaction, and the unexpected dismissal. "I can't believe this happened for just trying to do the right thing," he concluded, frustration boiling over. "Man, that's messed up," Hank replied, empathy evident in his tone. "But you know what? This could be the start of something big. You helped me today, and maybe you can help more people like me." "What do you mean?" Troy asked, intrigued. "We can raise awareness about the struggles veterans face when they return home. You've already shown you care, and there are plenty of others who feel the same way," Hank suggested. Troy pondered the idea. Perhaps this was the spark he needed to turn a painful experience into something meaningful. "You're right. I want to make a difference, not just for myself, but for all the veterans out there. And so, with renewed determination, Troy began to formulate a plan. He would take his story public. He would create a platform to advocate for veterans and raise awareness about the challenges they faced. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to fight for what he believed in, starting with a simple act of kindness that had forever altered his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Troy felt a fire ignite within him. It was a fire fueled by his desire to stand up for those who had been silenced, to ensure that no veteran felt as alone as Hank once did. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a profound journey, a journey that would challenge the status quo, inspire change, and ultimately lead to a wave of compassion and unity within his community. The Awakening. As the night deepened, Troy sat on his small balcony, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the events of the day. The distant sounds of the city, cars honking, laughter echoing from nearby bars, and the low hum of conversations, felt worlds away from his reality. The warmth of the coffee contrasted sharply with the chill of uncertainty creeping into his heart. He had always been a person who stood up for what was right, but now, faced with unemployment and the challenges that lay ahead, he felt the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. Troy pulled out his phone and dialed Hank's number once again. This time, it was not just about seeking comfort, it was about forging a plan. After a few rings, Hank answered, his voice warm and inviting. "Troy, good to hear from you again. You're not still thinking about what happened earlier, are you?" Hank asked, his tone light yet concerned. "No, I'm thinking about what comes next," Troy replied, determination surging within him. "I want to help veterans like you. I want to raise awareness about what you guys go through after serving." "I love that idea," Hank said, excitement creeping into his voice. "But where do we start? There are so many veterans who need a voice." Troy took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities. "Let's start with social media. I can share my story and the struggles veterans face. We can create a platform where veterans can share their experiences, maybe even organize some community events to raise awareness." Community events could be huge. We can invite local businesses, get some media coverage, and really spread the word, Hank suggested, enthusiasm evident in his tone. Troy nodded, feeling invigorated by the conversation. "Let's do it. I'll start a social media campaign tomorrow and reach out to some local veteran organizations for support." "Count me in," Hank replied, his voice brimming with optimism. "We'll make a difference, I promise." The next day, Troy rose early, the sun filtering through the clouds, casting a golden hue across the city. He felt a renewed sense of purpose as he prepared to share his story. He fired up his laptop and began typing furiously, detailing the events that led to his dismissal from global shipping. He focused not just on his experience but also on Hank's story, emphasizing the challenges veterans face after returning home. His fingers danced over the keyboard as he poured his heart into the post. He described the moment he chose to help Hank, the warmth of the connection they shared, and the stark contrast of being fired for doing something he believed was right. By the time he hit publish, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The response was immediate. Friends, family, and even strangers began to comment, sharing their own experiences and expressing their support. Troy couldn't believe the wave of encouragement washing over him. "You're an inspiration, Troy," one comment read. "Thank you for standing up for veterans. We need more people like you in this world," another remarked. Emboldened by the outpouring of support, Troy decided to take it a step further. He created a dedicated social media page called Voices of Valor, where veterans could share their stories and connect with one another. His goal was simple: to create a community that offered support, resources, and a platform to raise awareness about the struggles veterans faced. With Hank's help, they quickly began reaching out to local veteran organizations, offering to partner on events that would benefit the community. They contacted shelters, advocacy groups, and even local businesses that might want to join their cause. The enthusiasm was palpable, and before long, they had a plan for their first community event, a fundraiser to support a local veterans shelter. As the weeks passed, Troy and Hank worked tirelessly to promote the event. They utilized social media to spread the word, sharing stories of veterans in need and highlighting the importance of community support. Troy found himself immersed in this new endeavor, his heart filled with purpose as he connected with fellow advocates and veterans. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and excitement buzzed through the air. The event was hosted in a local community center, adorned with banners that read "Voices of Valor," a celebration of courage. Troy stood at the entrance, greeting attendees as they arrived. The atmosphere was vibrant, filled with laughter and camaraderie, as veterans and community members mingled, united by a shared goal. "Look at this turnout," Hank exclaimed, grinning widely as he surveyed the crowd. "I can't believe how many people came out to support us." "Neither can I," Troy replied, his heart swelling with gratitude. "This is what it's all about, bringing people together to make a difference." As the event kicked off, local businesses showcased their contributions, from food stalls to auction items. Troy took to the stage to share his story, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was fired for helping a veteran," he began, eliciting gasps from the audience. "But I believe that helping one person can create a ripple effect of change. That's why we're here today, to support our veterans and ensure they receive the care and respect they deserve." The crowd erupted into applause, and Troy felt a renewed sense of hope. He wasn't just sharing his story. He was igniting a movement that would challenge the very fabric of the community. Throughout the evening, veterans spoke about their experiences, sharing both their struggles and their triumphs. Each story resonated deeply, painting a vivid picture of the resilience and courage within the veteran community. As the night drew to a close, Troy and Hank were amazed by the amount of money raised for the shelter. They had exceeded their initial goal, and the feeling of achievement was overwhelming. "This is just the beginning, Troy," Hank said, his voice filled with conviction. "We have so much more work to do." In the days following the event, the momentum continued to build. Local news outlets picked up their story, and soon Troy found himself being interviewed about his experiences. With every interview, he emphasized the need for community support for veterans, urging people to recognize the challenges they faced upon returning home. As Troy shared his message, he also began to reflect on his own journey. He had faced adversity, but he refused to let it define him. Instead, he found strength in his vulnerability and transformed his pain into purpose. However, not everyone was pleased with Troy's newfound activism. Word of his efforts reached the upper management of global shipping, who viewed the growing movement as a threat to their reputation. They were particularly concerned about the media attention that Troy had garnered and how it painted the company in a negative light. Mr. Jenkins, Troy's former supervisor, was determined to squash this uprising before it gained any more traction. "We need to take action," he declared in a meeting with the company executives. "This isn't just about a fired employee anymore. It's about our brand image. If we let this continue, it could hurt our business." The executives nodded in agreement, their faces etched with concern. "What do you suggest?" one of them asked. "We need to issue a statement, something that distances us from Troy and reaffirms our commitment to veterans, but without acknowledging him directly. We can't let him turn this into a movement that targets us," Mr. Jenkins replied, his tone resolute. Unbeknownst to Troy, the company was already plotting their next move, one that would bring the struggle he faced into even sharper focus. Back in his apartment, Troy continued to work with Hank and their growing community of supporters. They organized more events, created resources for veterans seeking help, and engaged with local politicians to advocate for better services for veterans. The energy was electric, and the response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. One evening, as they sat down to plan their next fundraiser, Hank looked at Troy with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about how we can really elevate our cause. What if we started a petition to get the city to provide more support for veterans? We can highlight the gaps in services and push for real change. Troy nodded thoughtfully. That's a brilliant idea, Hank. We can gather signatures at our events and use social media to amplify our message. We need to show the city that veterans deserve better. The two men set to work, drafting a petition and outlining their goals. They wanted to bring awareness not only to the struggles of veterans, but also to the systemic issues that made it difficult for them to reintegrate into society. The petition would serve as a powerful tool, showcasing the community's support for meaningful change. As they finalized the petition, Troy felt a sense of urgency. He wanted to build momentum before the company could react to their growing influence. Every moment felt crucial. They were on the cusp of something significant. The following week, Troy and Hank launched the petition during their next event, and the response was overwhelming. People flocked to their booth, eager to sign and show their support. The passion in the room was palpable as veterans shared their stories with those who came to listen. "This is amazing, Troy," Hank exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. "Look at all these signatures. We're really making a difference." Troy smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. "This is just the beginning. We'll take this to the city council, and we won't stop until our voices are heard." Days turned into weeks, and the momentum continued to grow. News outlets began covering their story more frequently, highlighting their efforts to advocate for veterans. Troy's message was resonating with a broader audience, and soon, other communities reached out, wanting to replicate their efforts. But amidst the success, Troy remained grounded. He was acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead, especially with global shipping still looming in the background. As he looked at the growing support around him, he understood that their fight was just beginning. Then, one fateful afternoon, Troy received an unexpected phone call. It was a reporter from a local news station, eager to interview him about the petition and the community's response. "Troy, we've been following your journey, and we'd love to feature you on our evening news segment," the reporter said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "This is a powerful story, and we believe it will inspire many." Troy felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I'd love to, but I'm also concerned about how the company will react." "Don't worry. Our viewers need to hear your story," she reassured him. "You have the community behind you, and this is an opportunity to shed light on the issues veterans face." With a deep breath, Troy agreed. He knew that this was an important moment, not just for him, but for all the veterans whose stories remained untold. That evening, Troy stood in front of the camera, his heart racing. As the interviewer began, he shared his journey, his experience at global shipping, his act of kindness toward Hank, and the subsequent movement that had grown from it. "Veterans deserve our support, not just during their service, but after they return home," he stated passionately. "We need to stand up for them, advocate for their needs, and ensure they are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." As the segment aired that night, Troy's words resonated throughout the community. Social media erupted with support, and the petition gained traction at an unprecedented rate. People shared their own experiences with veterans, calling for action and change. However, the reaction from global shipping was swift. They issued a public statement attempting to distance themselves from Troy's message, claiming they had always supported veterans, while failing to acknowledge the growing backlash against their policies. Mr. Jenkins, now facing scrutiny for his actions, called an emergency meeting with the executives. "We need to control this narrative," he said, his frustration palpable. "Troy has turned this into a movement, and we can't let it jeopardize our reputation." As the executives plotted their next move, Troy remained focused on his mission, unyielding in his determination to bring about change. With every passing day, the fire within him burned brighter, fueled by the support of the community and the veterans who had inspired him. Little did he know, the next phase of his journey would not only challenge global shipping, but also redefine his purpose and the lives of countless veterans. The storm brews. Troy awoke the next morning to a flurry of notifications on his phone. The news segment had gone viral, reaching audiences far beyond the local community. Friends, family, and even strangers were reaching out to share their support and stories of their own connections to veterans. As he scrolled through the messages, he felt a sense of empowerment wash over him. This was more than just his story. It was a collective call for change, echoing the voices of veterans everywhere. His phone buzzed again, and a notification from his social media page, Voices of Valor, caught his eye. It read, "Let's stand with Troy. Join us at the City Council meeting this Wednesday to advocate for better veteran support." The post had already garnered hundreds of shares, and the comments were a mix of enthusiasm and determination. "Wow," Troy murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is really happening." He quickly got dressed and called Hank to discuss the mounting momentum. "Hank, you won't believe how many people want to show up at the City Council meeting. This could be a game changer for us." "Let's prepare some talking points," Hank replied, his voice brimming with excitement. "We need to make sure our message is clear and impactful. This is our chance to advocate for real change." The days leading up to the City Council meeting were a whirlwind. Troy and Hank organized a rally, inviting veterans, families, and community supporters to attend. Flyers were distributed, social media posts went viral, and local news outlets continued to cover their story. On the morning of the meeting, Troy stood outside the city hall, watching as people began to gather. He was overwhelmed by the sheer number of supporters who had come to stand with him. Holding signs that read, "Support our veterans," and "Voices of Valor," the crowd formed a sea of passionate faces, each one representing a shared commitment to advocacy. Hank joined Troy, both of them beaming with pride. "Look at this. We've got people from all walks of life here," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is powerful." Troy nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Let's not waste this opportunity. We need to make sure the council understands the urgency of our cause." As the meeting began, the atmosphere in the council chamber was charged with energy. People filled the seats, and the council members looked out at the throngs of supporters standing outside the building. They knew the significance of the moment, but little did they know the storm that was brewing behind closed doors. Mr. Jenkins, the global shipping executive who had been orchestrating a counter-narrative, sat in the back row. He observed the crowd with narrowed eyes, convinced that Troy's movement could threaten the company's image. He had already contacted the media, attempting to portray global shipping as a champion of veteran support, eager to diffuse the growing backlash. "Let's see how this plays out," he murmured to himself, a self-satisfied smile creeping across his face. Inside the chamber, Troy was called to the podium. His heart raced as he approached the microphone. The eyes of the council and the packed room focused intently on him. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Troy Johnson, and I'm here not just as a former employee of Global Shipping, but as a voice for the many veterans in our community who have been overlooked and underserved." He spoke passionately about the challenges faced by veterans: mental health issues, unemployment, homelessness, and lack of access to health care. He recounted Hank's story, illustrating the struggles veterans endured and how society often failed to recognize their sacrifices. "I was fired for helping a veteran," he said, his voice unwavering. "But I believe that this moment can become a catalyst for change. We have the power to ensure that no veteran feels alone, that they receive the support they deserve when they return home." The audience erupted in applause, and Troy felt the energy shift in the room. He continued, outlining their petition and the proposed initiatives that would benefit veterans, such as job training programs, mental health resources, and dedicated support services. As Troy wrapped up his speech, he turned to the crowd. "Together, we can create a community that honors and uplifts our veterans. This is our chance to stand in solidarity and show them they are not forgotten." The applause grew louder, echoing through the chamber as Troy stepped away from the microphone, a sense of accomplishment flooding his heart. He looked to Hank, who beamed with pride. They had ignited a movement, and it was just getting started. As the meeting continued, various supporters took to the podium, each sharing their personal stories and reinforcing the urgent need for change. The council members listened attentively, taking notes and nodding in acknowledgement. For the first time in a long while, veterans felt seen and heard. After several emotional testimonies, the council members began to deliberate. Troy and Hank watched anxiously from the audience, hope mingling with trepidation. Finally, Councilman Rivera, a strong advocate for veteran issues, took the floor. "I'd like to commend everyone who has come forward today," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "Your stories are powerful, and they remind us of the obligations we have to those who have served our country. We need to take immediate action to address these concerns." As Councilman Rivera outlined a plan to form a committee focused on veteran affairs, Troy felt a surge of hope. But just as he began to relax, a figure emerged from the back of the room. Mr. Jenkins. With a calculated stride, Jenkins approached the podium, the atmosphere shifting in an instant. "Excuse me, Councilman, but I must interject," he said, his tone assertive. "While I respect the stories shared here today, I would like to remind everyone that Global Shipping has always been committed to supporting veterans. We have initiatives in place that directly benefit those who have served." Troy's heart sank. He had anticipated this moment. Jenkins continued, his words slick and rehearsed. "It is important to recognize the positive efforts of our company and how we work tirelessly to support our community. We believe in uplifting veterans, not tearing them down." Troy could feel the tension rising in the room. He turned to Hank, who clenched his fists in anger. "He's trying to twist the narrative," Hank whispered, his frustration evident. "We need to counter this." "Let's stick to the facts," Troy replied, taking a deep breath. "We need to remain focused on our message." As Jenkins continued, painting Global Shipping in a heroic light, Troy's resolve deepened. He had witnessed firsthand the struggles veterans faced, and he wasn't about to let Jenkins diminish their reality. As the meeting came to a close, the council voted to form the committee, with overwhelming support from the audience. Troy felt a surge of victory, but he knew the fight was far from over. The real challenge lay ahead, holding Global Shipping accountable and ensuring their promises translated into real support for veterans. As the crowd began to disperse, Troy and Hank gathered with their supporters, exhilarated by the outcome. "This is just the start," Hank said, a gleam of determination in his eyes. "We need to keep the pressure on." "Absolutely," Troy agreed. "We'll keep pushing for transparency and real change. We have the community's support, and we need to make sure it doesn't wane." Later that evening, as Troy reflected on the day's events, he received a call from Hank. "You won't believe this, but we just got a call from a national news outlet interested in covering our story," Hank exclaimed, his voice bubbling with excitement. Troy could hardly contain his own excitement. "This could amplify our message even further. We have to be ready." "I'll set up a meeting," Hank replied. "Let's make sure we're prepared to share the truth about veterans and the support they need." In the days that followed, the coverage of their story spread like wildfire. Media outlets from across the country began to reach out, highlighting the petition and the grassroots movement that Troy had sparked. Each interview provided an opportunity to advocate for veterans and share their stories, reinforcing the message that they deserved better. However, as the media attention grew, so did the scrutiny from Global Shipping. Behind the scenes, Mr. Jenkins was working tirelessly to regain control of the narrative. He arranged for a press conference, determined to publicly address the situation and divert attention away from Troy's movement. On the day of the press conference, Jenkins stood before a sea of reporters, his expression a mask of confidence. "Today, I want to reaffirm Global Shipping's commitment to our veterans. We have implemented numerous programs that directly support those who have served, and we will continue to do so," he announced, flashing a rehearsed smile. As he spoke, Troy watched from the back of the crowd, anger boiling within him. Jenkins' words felt hollow, a mere facade that masked the reality of what veterans face daily. But rather than retreat, Troy felt a surge of courage. "We need to respond," he said to Hank, who stood beside him. "We can't let him get away with this." As the press conference concluded, reporters rushed to gather information from Jenkins. Seizing the opportunity, Troy stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Jenkins," he called out, his voice steady and loud enough to capture attention. "What about the veterans who are struggling to find jobs? What about the mental health resources that are lacking? How can you claim to support veterans while so many are left behind?" The crowd gasped, and the tension in the air thickened. Jenkins' expression faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure. "We have initiatives in place to support veterans, and I encourage everyone to reach out if they need assistance." "That's not enough," Troy pressed, undeterred. "You're asking us to believe that a few programs can replace the fundamental change that's needed to truly support our veterans. We need action, not just words." The reporters shifted their attention from Jenkins to Troy, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward to capture his words. As the confrontation continued, Troy felt a sense of empowerment enveloping him. This was not just about his story anymore. It was about the collective voice of veterans and their families who had long been silenced. He was ready to challenge the status quo, even if it meant facing the wrath of a corporation that sought to suppress the truth. Jenkins, cornered, attempted to shift the conversation. "I urge you all to consider the efforts we've made. Change takes time, and we are committed to that change." Troy shook his head, unwilling to back down. "It's not about time. It's about urgency. Veterans are struggling every single day, and they can't wait for a corporation to get its act together. They need real support now." The tension escalated as the reporters began to ask more questions, each one probing deeper into global shipping's policies. For every attempt Jenkins made to deflect blame, Troy's unwavering determination painted a clearer picture of the reality veterans faced. By the end of the day, the story had taken on a life of its own. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #VeteransDeserveBetter and #StandWithTroy, amplifying the call for change. As Troy returned home, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had reached a tipping point. Hank met him at his apartment, a wide grin on his face. "Did you see the response? It's blowing up. People are rallying for our cause." "Yeah, but this is just the beginning," Troy replied, his mind racing. "We need to keep this momentum going." As the night wore on, the two friends brainstormed strategies to keep their message alive. They envisioned town halls, community events, and partnerships with local organizations dedicated to veteran support. They wanted to ensure their movement would not just fizzle out after the media attention waned. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Troy and Hank organized rallies, invited guest speakers to share their experiences, and collaborated with organizations focused on veteran issues. They held workshops on mental health awareness and job readiness, striving to create a comprehensive support network for veterans in the community. Meanwhile, global shipping continued to grapple with the fallout from the media coverage. Jenkins was under pressure to prove their commitment to veterans, and he launched a series of new initiatives, though many viewed them as reactive measures rather than genuine efforts. Despite the whirlwind of activity, Troy remained grounded. Each day brought new challenges, but with each challenge came a renewed sense of purpose. He was driven not just by the desire to clear his name, but to ensure that no veteran felt alone in their struggles. As Troy stood at the podium during one of their rallies, looking out at the faces of supporters, veterans and civilians alike, he felt a profound connection. "This movement is not just about me. It's about all of us," he declared passionately. "Together, we can build a community that uplifts and empowers our veterans, ensuring they receive the support they've earned and deserve." The crowd erupted into applause, a chorus of voices united in their mission. Troy knew that they were on the cusp of something significant, and he was determined to see it through. Uncovering the truth. As the weeks turned into months, The momentum of Troy's movement only intensified. The grassroots campaign he had initiated was no longer just about his personal experience. It had transformed into a rallying cry for veterans across the nation. Social media buzzed with stories of triumphs and struggles, and the hashtag Veterans Deserve Better became a symbol of hope and solidarity. Troy found himself invited to speak at various events, sharing the stage with veterans, advocates, and community leaders. Each time he took the podium, he felt the weight of responsibility. The community was looking to him not only as a voice for veterans, but as a beacon of change. One evening, after a particularly emotional rally, Troy returned home, his heart full but his mind racing. He sat down with Hank to reflect on their next steps. "We got to do more than just raise awareness," Troy said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "We need to push for tangible change. Laws, funding, real programs that make a difference." "I agree," Hank replied, flipping through notes from their recent meetings. "What if we organized a town hall with local lawmakers? We can invite veterans to share their stories directly with them. It could create a real impact." "That's a great idea," Troy said, excitement building. "If we can get lawmakers to hear firsthand about the challenges veterans face, maybe we can influence policy." They set to work planning the town hall meeting, reaching out to local representatives and veterans organizations. They organized a panel of veterans willing to share their stories, each one more poignant than the last. As the date approached, the anticipation in the community was palpable. Flyers went up, social media posts spread the word, and a palpable sense of urgency enveloped their mission. On the day of the town hall, Troy arrived early to set up. The venue was packed, with chairs filled to capacity and more people standing at the back. The energy was electric, the room buzzing with shared purpose. Troy felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration as he prepared to welcome the crowd. As the meeting commenced, Troy took the stage alongside the panel of veterans. He introduced the event, sharing the vision behind it. "Today, we are here to give a voice to those who have served our country," he began. "This is a chance for our lawmakers to hear directly from you, the veterans, about your experiences, your struggles, and your hopes for the future." The first veteran, a middle-aged man named Daniel, stepped forward. His voice trembled as he shared his story of returning from combat and facing debilitating PTSD. "I fought for my country, but when I came home, I found myself fighting just to survive. The resources available to veterans are often inadequate or hard to access," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The room was silent, the audience hanging on his every word. Troy glanced around, noting the empathy etched on the faces of those present. It was moments like this that reinforced their mission. As the stories continued, Troy saw the impact they were having. Local lawmakers sat in rapt attention, scribbling notes and exchanging glances with one another. It was clear that the narratives being shared were making an impression. After several emotional testimonies, a local senator, Senator Ramirez, stood up to address the audience. "Thank you for sharing your stories with us today," he said, his voice steady and firm. "It takes immense courage to stand before us and speak your truth. I want you to know that we hear you, and we will do everything in our power to advocate for the changes you need." A wave of applause erupted in the room. Troy felt a rush of hope surge through him. They were finally making headway, and the momentum was shifting toward their favor. However, as the meeting continued, Troy noticed a small group of representatives from global shipping in the back of the room, their expressions unreadable. Troy's heart raced at the thought of their presence. He had hoped that global shipping would be receptive to the changes they were advocating for, but their reputation was still tainted in his eyes. After the meeting, Troy and Hank mingled with attendees, gathering feedback and sharing their gratitude for the support. As they moved toward the exit, Troy spotted Mr. Jenkins standing by the door, a carefully curated smile plastered on his face. "Troy," Jenkins called out, striding over with outstretched arms. "I wanted to congratulate you on the successful town hall meeting. It's inspiring to see so many come together for such an important cause." Troy's jaw tightened as he forced a smile in return. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I appreciate your attendance. Of course, we at Global Shipping are committed to supporting veterans, and I'd like to discuss how we can collaborate on future initiatives," Jenkins continued, his tone smooth yet insincere. Troy felt a surge of skepticism. "With all due respect, Mr. Jenkins, your company's commitment has been called into question. Many veterans feel let down by the lack of meaningful support." Jenkins raised an eyebrow, but his smile didn't waver. "I understand, and that's why I'm here. We want to work together to ensure that veterans receive the resources they need. Perhaps we could set up a meeting to discuss potential programs." Before Troy could respond, Hank stepped in. "Troy's schedule is pretty packed right now, but we'll definitely consider it. Thanks for the offer." Jenkins nodded, his gaze shifting toward the crowd. "Great. Just know that we're willing to be part of the solution." As Jenkins walked away, Troy couldn't shake the feeling that the man's intentions were far from genuine. "I don't trust him," Troy said to Hank, crossing his arms. "It feels like they're just trying to save face." "I know what you mean," Hank replied. "But let's keep the pressure on. We can't let them sweep this under the rug. We need to hold them accountable." As the weeks passed, Troy and Hank continued their advocacy work. They organized workshops, brought in mental health professionals, and collaborated with local businesses to create job training programs for veterans. The community response was overwhelmingly positive, and support for their cause grew exponentially. However, Troy remained acutely aware of Global Shipping's influence. Their efforts to portray themselves as veterans' advocates were only intensifying. Jenkins began to release a series of press statements, showcasing Global Shipping's supposed initiatives and their commitment to supporting veterans. Troy and Hank monitored these developments closely, recognizing that the narrative was shifting, but they also understood that it was their responsibility to expose the truth. With every announcement from Global Shipping, they organized counter-campaigns to highlight the discrepancies between the company's claims and the reality faced by veterans. "Let's gather stories from veterans who have been overlooked," Troy suggested during one of their strategy meetings. "We can compile their experiences and share them with the media to ensure their voices are heard." Hank nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. We need to create a contrast between their polished press releases and the real struggles of veterans on the ground." The day they released their report was significant, titled, "The Real Face of Veteran Support." A community report, it compiled testimonials from veterans, detailing the gaps in resources and support. The report quickly gained traction, attracting attention from local media and prompting discussions within the community. As the media picked up the story, Troy received a call from a prominent news outlet that wanted to feature him in a special segment. "We want to highlight your work and the discrepancies in Global Shipping's claims," the producer said. This could really bring attention to the issue. Feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety, Troy agreed. "Let's do it. The community deserves to know the truth." On the day of the interview, Troy stood in front of the camera, heart racing, as he prepared to share his message. The studio was bustling, and the producer walked him through the segments. "Troy, we're going to start by discussing your experiences with Global Shipping and the veterans support issue," the producer explained. "We want to highlight the disparity between what they claim and what's happening on the ground." "Sounds good," Troy replied, taking a deep breath. He had rehearsed his points, but now he felt the weight of responsibility to ensure veterans' voices were heard. As the segment aired, Troy spoke passionately about the need for accountability and transparency in veteran support. "Veterans deserve more than just words," he emphasized. "They need real resources and a community that stands behind them. Global Shipping claims to support veterans, but the reality tells a different story." As the interview concluded, Troy felt a sense of relief. He knew they were making an impact, but he also sensed that Global Shipping was preparing for a counterattack. In the days following the interview, Jenkins and the Global Shipping team issued a series of defensive statements, attempting to undermine Troy's claims and regain control of the narrative. Troy was ready for it. "We can't let them deflect," he told Hank. "We need to amplify our message even louder." They organized another rally, inviting veterans to share their experiences directly with the community. As the date approached, anticipation built. Troy and Hank worked tirelessly to ensure the event would be impactful, using social media to gather support and encourage attendance. On the day of the rally, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd gathered, a diverse mix of veterans, families, and community supporters. Troy took to the stage, his heart pounding as he prepared to speak. "Today, we stand united in our mission," he began, his voice resonating through the crowd. "We will not be silenced, and we will not allow anyone to undermine the struggles faced by our veterans." As veterans stepped forward to share their stories, the crowd listened intently. Each narrative added weight to their cause, reinforcing the urgency for change. As Troy looked out at the sea of faces, he knew they were on the cusp of something transformative. They had ignited a movement that challenged not just global shipping, but the broader systems that had neglected veterans for too long. The journey was far from over, but with each step they took, they were forging a path toward a brighter future for veterans. Troy felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose, knowing they had the power to drive change and create a lasting impact. To be continued. Let me know when you're ready for Part 5, or if there's anything else you'd like to explore in this part. The storm before the calm. As the rally came to a close, Troy stood on the stage, his heart swelling with pride. The energy in the air was electric, the voices of veterans echoing the sentiments he had fought for since the beginning of this journey. The movement they had started was now more than just a fight against a corporation. It was a beacon of hope for countless veterans who had felt unheard and unseen. The next day, media outlets across the city ran stories about the rally, highlighting the emotional testimonies and the united front that Troy and his supporters had formed. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #StandWithVeterans and #TroyTheVoice, drawing even more attention to the cause. However, amid the celebration, Troy knew that this was only the beginning. Global shipping was not going to take this challenge lying down. Jenkins and his team would be strategizing their next move, and Troy was all too aware that they had the resources to mount a significant counteroffensive. Later that evening, Troy and Hank met to discuss the rally's success and their strategy moving forward. "We did well today," Hank said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "The turnout was incredible, and the media coverage will definitely help us gain more traction." "But we can't get complacent," Troy replied, rubbing his temples. "I expect Jenkins to come back swinging. They'll try to discredit us, undermine our movement, and twist the narrative to fit their agenda." "I know, but we're ready for that, right?" Hank leaned forward, a determined glint in his eye. "We've got the stories, the data, and the community behind us. We just need to keep the pressure on." "Exactly," Troy said, feeling a sense of solidarity with Hank. "We need to show that this is not just about one incident, but a systemic failure to support veterans in our society." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Troy and Hank worked tirelessly, reaching out to local leaders, scheduling interviews, and organizing community events. They were committed to ensuring that the stories of veterans remained front and center in public discourse. But as Troy had anticipated, Jenkins was not idle. Just a few days after the rally, Global Shipping issued a press release touting their enhanced veteran support initiatives, detailing new programs that had been in the works for months. The timing was too convenient for Troy to overlook. It felt like a direct response to their movement. "Look at this," Hank said, shoving a printed article across the table during one of their strategy meetings. The headline read, "Global Shipping Enhances Veteran Support Programs Amid Community Outcry." "Unbelievable," Troy muttered, reading through the claims of increased funding and new partnerships with veteran organizations. "They're trying to rebrand themselves as the hero in this story. We have to counter this narrative. We should do a follow-up report showcasing how these initiatives don't align with the realities faced by veterans," Hank suggested. We need to expose the truth behind their flashy press releases. Troy nodded, the fire reigniting within him. Let's reach out to those organizations and see if they're actually involved. If they're not, we'll expose the facade. As they gathered information for their follow-up report, Troy felt the pressure mounting. The stakes were higher than ever. They needed to present a solid case that would not only debunk Global Shipping's claims, but also reinforce their own mission. After several days of relentless research and interviews with veterans, Troy and Hank discovered a pattern. Many of the organizations Global Shipping claimed to be partnering with had not heard from them, and the funding they touted was more symbolic than substantial. "Look at this," Hank said one evening, pointing to a spreadsheet filled with data. "The numbers don't match up. They're inflating their contributions while actual veteran support remains woefully inadequate." Troy felt a surge of determination. "We need to package this information carefully. It's not just about disproving them. It's about presenting a compelling narrative that shows the truth of what veterans are experiencing." With a renewed sense of purpose, they set to work, crafting a detailed report titled Promises versus Reality: The Truth Behind Corporate Veteran Support. The report meticulously outlined the gaps between Global Shipping's claims and the lived experiences of veterans, complete with testimonials and statistical evidence. As the report neared completion, Troy received an unexpected phone call. It was from a producer at a national news outlet, interested in covering the story of his movement. "We've been following your work closely and would like to interview you for a feature segment," the producer said. "We believe your story has the potential to reach a much larger audience." Troy felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Absolutely, I'd love to share our message, but I want to ensure that the focus remains on the veterans and their struggles, not just my story." "Of course," the producer assured him. "We're interested in highlighting the systemic issues faced by veterans and the efforts of your movement to address them." After confirming the interview date, Troy shared the news with Hank, who jumped up with enthusiasm. "This is amazing. A national platform could elevate our cause significantly." "Yeah, but we have to be strategic," Troy replied. "We need to ensure that our message is clear and that we include the voices of veterans in the discussion." The day of the interview arrived, and Troy felt the weight of expectation on his shoulders. He wanted to make sure their message resonated, reaching not just veterans, but the broader public as well. As he sat in front of the camera, the producer gave him a reassuring nod, and the lights flickered on. "Welcome, Troy Johnson," the host began. "You've been at the forefront of a movement advocating for better support for veterans. Can you tell us what prompted you to take a stand?" Troy took a deep breath, his heart racing. "I've seen firsthand the struggles veterans face when they return home. I believe we owe it to them to ensure they receive the support they need. My journey began when I witnessed a fellow veteran struggling, and I realized that if I didn't speak up, nothing would change." The host nodded, inviting Troy to delve deeper into the stories he had gathered from veterans. As he shared their experiences, Troy felt a sense of empowerment wash over him. He was no longer just a warehouse worker. He was a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. The segment aired to an audience of millions, igniting conversations about veteran support across the nation. Social media exploded with reactions, and hashtags related to Troy's movement began trending. The support poured in, with people sharing their own stories and experiences. However, Troy was acutely aware of the impending backlash from Global Shipping. Just as he suspected, Jenkins wasted no time in crafting a response to the growing attention. A few days after the segment aired, Global Shipping released another statement, claiming they were fully committed to supporting veterans and engaged in meaningful partnerships to address the issues raised. "Troy, we need to respond," Hank said during their next meeting, frustration evident in his tone. "Their claims are still misleading, and they're trying to distract from the real issues." "Absolutely," Troy agreed. "Let's use the momentum we've built to push back. We can organize a press conference to present our findings and challenge their narrative directly." They scheduled the press conference for the following week, And as the day approached, anticipation grew. The media buzzed with speculation about what Troy would unveil. His followers rallied around him, and support poured in from all corners of the community. On the day of the press conference, Troy stood in front of a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing as he took the podium. The atmosphere was charged, and he could feel the weight of expectation resting heavily on his shoulders. "Thank you for being here today," he began, glancing at the assembled journalists. "Today, we stand not just for ourselves, but for every veteran who has been let down by systems that should support them." He then proceeded to outline the discrepancies in Global Shipping's claims, backing up his statements with the evidence they had compiled. He displayed charts that highlighted the funding gaps, along with direct testimonials from veterans who felt abandoned by the company's supposed initiatives. As he spoke, he felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment he had been working toward, a chance to hold those in power accountable. "We are here to say that we deserve better," he declared passionately. "Veterans should not have to fight for the support they have earned. We need real change, and we need it now." The conference was a resounding success. As Troy concluded his address, reporters bombarded him with questions, eager to dig deeper into the issues he had raised. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, major news outlets picked up the story, amplifying Troy's message. As the news spread, Jenkins was forced into damage control mode. He issued a statement denouncing Troy's claims, arguing that Global Shipping had always been committed to veteran support. However, the damage had been done. The public outcry only grew louder, and Jenkins found himself backed into a corner. In the days that followed, Troy and Hank received messages of support from all over the country. People were reaching out, sharing their own experiences, and expressing their gratitude for the work they were doing. The movement was gaining traction, but with it came the realization that they had crossed a threshold from advocacy to activism. Troy understood that they were now part of a larger conversation about corporate accountability and the responsibility to support veterans adequately. It was a daunting prospect, but he was fueled by the belief that they could enact real change. As they prepared for the next phase of their advocacy, Troy felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The journey had been challenging, but the camaraderie and determination he witnessed in his fellow veterans made every obstacle worthwhile. Yet, amid the hope and progress, Troy sensed the looming shadow of retaliation. He knew Global Shipping would not go down without a fight. Jenkins was not only a business rival, but a man whose reputation was at stake. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next," Hank said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "We can't underestimate them. They have resources, and they won't hesitate to use them against us." "Agreed," Troy replied, his mind racing. "But we also have something they don't: the truth on our side. We need to keep the focus on veterans and ensure their stories remain at the forefront." As they continued their planning, Troy felt a sense of determination well up within him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was committed to standing up for those who had served, ready to face whatever storm might come. A new dawn. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Troy and Hank. The press conference had catapulted their movement into the national spotlight, and they received invitations to speak at various events, engage with policymakers, and participate in interviews. Their message was resonating beyond their community, and support continued to grow. However, as they celebrated their victories, Troy was acutely aware of the looming threat from Global Shipping. Jenkins had not been idle. He was strategizing, likely seeking ways to undermine their efforts. Troy knew the company had deep pockets and connections, and they wouldn't hesitate to use them to discredit him and his cause. One afternoon, as Troy and Hank were finalizing their plans for an upcoming town hall meeting, Troy received an unexpected call from a local news station. "Troy, we'd like to do an in-depth profile on you and your advocacy," the reporter said. "We believe your story can inspire others to take action." Troy's heart raced. "That sounds great, but I want to make sure it highlights the voices of veterans rather than just my journey." "Absolutely," the reporter assured him. We want to emphasize the collective experience and the need for change. After hanging up, Troy shared the news with Hank. This could be another opportunity to amplify our message, Troy said, excitement brewing in his voice. Hank nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Let's make sure we include stories from veterans in the community. It's their experiences that will resonate with viewers. As the interview date approached, Troy worked closely with veterans to gather their stories. Each narrative was unique, yet they shared a common theme: a struggle to adapt to civilian life after serving their country. One veteran, Maria, shared her story of facing physical and mental challenges after returning home, feeling invisible in a society that seemed to overlook the sacrifices made by people in uniform. Troy, it's essential that we bring these stories to light, she said during one of their meetings. People need to understand that veterans are fighting battles long after they leave the battlefield. I completely agree, Troy replied, feeling the weight of responsibility. We have to ensure that their experiences are heard loud and clear. The day of the interview arrived, and Troy felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. The studio was bustling with activity as the production team set up for the segment. When the host introduced him on air, Troy took a deep breath, knowing this was a chance to amplify the voices of veterans who had felt unheard. "Welcome, Troy Johnson," the host said. "You've been at the forefront of advocating for veterans' rights and support. Can you share what motivated you to take a stand?" Troy smiled, looking directly into the camera. "It all started with a simple act of kindness. When I saw a fellow veteran struggling, I realized that I had to do more. This isn't just about me. It's about every veteran who has faced adversity after serving our country." As he spoke, he included the stories of Maria and others, illustrating the harsh realities they faced. The segment was powerful, showcasing not only the struggles but also the resilience of veterans determined to be heard. As the segment aired, social media buzzed with responses. Viewers shared their own experiences and expressed solidarity with the veterans' cause. Hashtags like #VoicesOfVeterans and #TroyAdvocate gained traction, helping to solidify the movement's presence online. However, it wasn't long before Jenkins retaliated. Global Shipping released a statement criticizing the interview, claiming that Troy's narrative was misleading and not representative of their efforts to support veterans. The statement attempted to paint Troy as a disgruntled employee rather than a passionate advocate. "Here we go," Troy muttered as he read the statement. "They're trying to undermine everything we've built." Hank leaned over Troy's shoulder, frowning at the screen. "We need to respond. If we let this slide, it could damage our credibility." "I agree," Troy replied, his mind racing. "We need to showcase the real stories behind the statistics and evidence we've gathered. We can't let them twist the narrative." Determined to counter Jenkins' claims, Troy and Hank began drafting a detailed response that outlined the discrepancies in Global Shipping's statement. They included testimonials from veterans, data supporting their claims, and a direct challenge to the company's narrative. As they prepared to share their response, they also organized a community forum, inviting veterans, local leaders, and community members to participate. "This is our chance to unite our voices against Global Shipping," Troy told Hank. "We can show them that we're not backing down." The night of the forum, the energy was palpable. Veterans gathered to share their stories, and the audience listened intently, absorbing the challenges faced by those who had served. Each testimony resonated deeply, highlighting the need for systemic change. Troy took the stage, feeling the collective strength of everyone present. "We are here to stand together, to show that we will not be silenced," he declared, his voice unwavering. "Global Shipping may have power and resources, but we have truth, courage, and the support of our community." As the forum came to a close, attendees voiced their support for the movement. Local leaders pledged to assist in advocating for better veteran support, and community members signed petitions demanding accountability from Global Shipping. Troy felt a surge of hope. The movement was growing stronger, fueled by the shared determination of those who believed in change. However, the sense of urgency remained. They knew global shipping would respond. Days later, as expected, Jenkins held a press conference of his own, accompanied by a slew of carefully curated veterans who spoke positively about their experiences with the company. Global shipping has always prioritized the well-being of our veterans, Jenkins claimed, a confident smile plastered on his face. Troy watched from his living room, anger boiling within him. "This is infuriating," he said to Hank over the phone. "They're parading these veterans as props while ignoring the real issues. Let's not let this slide." Hank replied, his tone resolute. "We have to confront this head-on. We need to provide a platform for the veterans who are still struggling." With a renewed sense of purpose, Troy organized a follow-up rally, inviting veterans who had not been given a voice at Jenkins' press conference. He reached out to local news outlets, ensuring coverage of the event to counter Jenkins' narrative. The day of the rally, a palpable energy filled the air. Veterans gathered, each sharing their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. The atmosphere was electric as Troy took the stage once more, determined to make their voices heard. "We are here today to stand against corporate interests that prioritize profit over people," Troy declared, looking out at the crowd. "We are here for the veterans who have been dismissed, ignored, and silenced. We are here to demand real change." The crowd erupted in applause, the momentum building as Troy continued to speak. "We deserve better. We've served our country, and it's time for our country to serve us." As the rally concluded, media coverage erupted, and Troy's voice was once again amplified. Social media flooded with videos and testimonials from the event, showcasing the raw emotion and unity present. People across the country began sharing their own stories, creating a groundswell of support for the movement. However, amidst the success, Troy felt the pressure from Jenkins intensifying. Global shipping's reputation was on the line, and Troy was acutely aware that they would likely escalate their efforts to discredit him. A few days after the rally, Troy received a call from an anonymous source who claimed to have inside information about global shipping's plans. "They're preparing a major legal challenge against you," the voice said, urgency lacing their tone. "They want to intimidate you into silence." Troy's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They're planning to sue for defamation, claiming you've misrepresented their support for veterans," the source continued. "They're hoping to bury you under legal fees and scare you into backing down." Troy hung up the phone, anxiety gripping him. "This is getting serious," he said to Hank when they met later. "They're not just trying to discredit us. They're gearing up for a legal battle." Hank's face turned grim. "We need to prepare. We can't let them intimidate us into silence. We'll need legal support, and we should consult with veterans' rights organizations." That evening, they reached out to several legal advocates who specialized in corporate accountability. After a series of meetings, they found a team willing to help, recognizing the importance of the cause and the potential impact it could have on veteran support nationwide. With their legal team on board, Troy felt a sense of relief. He wasn't alone in this fight, and together they prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They gathered evidence and testimonials, building a strong case that would counter global shipping's potential legal claims. As the days turned into weeks, Troy and Hank continued to advocate for veterans, rallying support and sharing stories. They were undeterred by the looming threat of a legal battle. They were committed to shining a light on the systemic issues that plagued veterans. One morning, as they prepared for another community meeting, Troy received an unexpected email from a prominent politician who had been following their movement. "I'd like to meet with you," the email read. "I believe we can work together to address these issues at a legislative level." Troy's heart raced as he read the message aloud to Hank. "This could be huge," Hank said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "We need to ensure that veterans' voices are front and center in any discussions." After scheduling a meeting, Troy felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they walked into the meeting room days later, he was determined to advocate fiercely for his fellow veterans. The politician, a charismatic woman named Senator Morales, welcomed them warmly. I've been following your movement closely, Troy. Your advocacy is inspiring, and I want to help elevate your message. Troy shared the stories of veterans he had met, the challenges they faced, and the urgency for systemic change. Senator Morales listened intently, nodding as he spoke. We need to create policies that ensure veterans receive the support they deserve, she said, her voice firm. Your movement could be the catalyst for real change. As the meeting wrapped up, Troy felt hopeful. This was a pivotal moment. Their movement was gaining traction, and they were no longer just advocating in their community. They were now on the verge of influencing policy on a larger scale. However, Troy was keenly aware that Jenkins and Global Shipping would not sit idly by. They had powerful connections and were likely strategizing their next move. As Troy and Hank prepared for the potential fallout, they remained committed to their cause. Weeks later, as they awaited a response from Senator Morales' office regarding proposed legislation, Troy received a notification on his phone. Global Shipping had officially filed a lawsuit against him for defamation. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. "This is it," he said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "They're really trying to crush us." Hank leaned over, glancing at the notification. "We knew they would retaliate. But this is just a tactic to intimidate us. We've built a strong case, and we can fight back." Determined not to let fear take hold, Troy gathered his legal team to prepare for the upcoming legal battle. They outlined a strategy that focused on proving the truth behind their claims and showcasing the widespread support for their cause. As the lawsuit gained media attention, Troy's story continued to resonate across the country. Support poured in from various organizations, individuals, and veterans who had faced similar challenges. Troy found himself at the center of a national conversation about veteran support and corporate accountability. At a rally in front of the courthouse, supporters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans that echoed the fight for veterans' rights. Troy took the stage, his voice rising above the crowd. "We are here today, not just for ourselves, but for every veteran who has faced neglect and discrimination. We will not back down." The energy was electric, and as he spoke, Troy could see the determination in the faces around him. This wasn't just about him. It was about creating a lasting change for all veterans. With each passing day, the movement grew stronger, drawing in allies from various sectors. Nonprofits, advocacy groups, and everyday citizens joined in solidarity, amplifying the call for justice and change. Meanwhile, Troy's legal team prepared for the court proceedings. They meticulously gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and documented the widespread support for the veterans' cause. They knew the stakes were high, but they also understood the significance of their fight. As the court date approached, tensions rose. Global Shipping's legal team was formidable, and Troy felt the pressure weighing on him. But he was resolute. He had come too far to turn back now. On the day of the court hearing, the atmosphere was tense. Troy stood outside the courthouse, flanked by supporters who had come to show their solidarity. As they entered the courtroom, Troy took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. Inside, the opposing counsel launched into a barrage of accusations, attempting to paint Troy as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge against Global Shipping. But Troy's legal team countered with evidence, testimonies from veterans, community support, and the undeniable impact of their advocacy. As the proceedings unfolded, it became clear that the tide was turning in Troy's favor. The judge appeared receptive to the testimonies and the evidence presented, allowing Troy's team to establish the broader narrative of neglect faced by veterans. After hours of deliberation, the judge called for a recess. Troy and Hank exchanged nervous glances, feeling the weight of the moment. Finally, they returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression serious. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, I find that there is substantial support for the claims made by Mr. Johnson and his advocacy for veterans," the judge announced. "The court will not dismiss this case, and I encourage both parties to seek an amicable resolution." The words felt like a victory. While the legal battle was not over, The judge's acknowledgment of their cause was a significant step forward. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating the momentous ruling. In the following days, Troy's story continued to gain traction. Interviews, articles, and social media campaigns focused on the plight of veterans, the need for corporate accountability, and the significance of grassroots movements. The support continued to swell, uniting people from all walks of life. With the momentum building, Senator Morales reached out again, excited to discuss legislative options that could arise from the growing movement. "Troy, this is a crucial moment," she said during their call. "We can draft a bill that directly addresses veterans' needs and ensure that companies are held accountable for their actions." Troy felt a surge of hope. "This is what we've been fighting for. We need comprehensive support for veterans, not just empty promises." As they discussed potential policies, Troy felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for the future of veterans everywhere. Weeks turned into months, and as the legal case proceeded, Troy's advocacy efforts expanded. He participated in discussions with lawmakers, engaging in panels, and rallying support across the nation. His message resonated with communities, igniting a passion for change that could no longer be ignored. Finally, the day arrived for the court to announce its final ruling. Troy stood outside the courthouse once more, a crowd of supporters gathered behind him. As they waited, he felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. When the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. "After considering all evidence and testimonies, I find that Mr. Johnson acted within his rights to advocate for veterans and their needs. The court acknowledges the systemic issues that affect veterans and encourages global shipping to engage in meaningful dialogue regarding these concerns." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Troy felt tears of relief and joy welling in his eyes. This was a turning point, not just for him, but for every veteran who had faced adversity. As Troy embraced his supporters, he knew this was just the beginning. The ruling had opened doors, and with it came the responsibility to keep pushing for change. Troy and Hank continued their advocacy work, partnering with organizations to draft comprehensive policies that would address the needs of veterans across the country. The movement gained further momentum, and within months, they succeeded in getting legislation passed that mandated increased support for veterans, including mental health services, job training programs, and corporate accountability measures for companies that failed to prioritize veteran welfare. Troy's journey had come full circle. What started as a simple act of kindness had transformed into a national movement, igniting change and giving voice to those who had long been silenced. He stood before a crowd of veterans and supporters, feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose. Today, we celebrate not just a victory in the courts, but a victory for every veteran who has ever felt ignored. Troy proclaimed, his voice strong and steady. "We have shown that when we come together, we can create real change. Our voices matter, and our stories are powerful." The crowd erupted into applause, the sense of unity palpable. Troy looked around, seeing the faces of veterans who had fought alongside him in this journey. They were no longer just individuals struggling to be heard. They were a movement, a force to be reckoned with. As he stood there, Troy felt a deep sense of gratitude. The struggles he faced had shaped him, and through it all, he had discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. His commitment to advocating for veterans was unwavering, and he knew the fight was far from over. The journey had tested him in ways he never expected, but it also revealed the power of community, compassion, and unwavering determination. Troy Johnson was no longer just a warehouse employee. He was a symbol of hope for countless veterans, proving that one person's actions could ignite a movement and challenge the status quo. And as he looked out at the sea of supporters, Troy knew they would continue to fight for every veteran, ensuring their voices would always be heard. Together, they would forge a new path, one of empathy, justice, and unwavering support.